This is the Team Objection podcast for February 18th, 2021, episode 472. It is just two gentlemen on the screen rather than three. We are both wearing a certain type of regalia. If you're watching the video stream, you know what that means. I mean, we have to talk about the Suns. We just talked about them when they went through maybe their worst swing of the season. What is hopefully their worst swing of the season? It only seems fair that we have to talk about them again when they've won 9 of 10.
I had two things that have bothered me, and they're both about Shaun. Unsurprisingly, I would say that's unsurprising. One, he was still in the intro. I was hoping that you'd slam the stop button as soon as it got past my picture on the intro, just to cut him out of this. Mm-hmm. Secondarily, he, in the last time we talked about the Suns, asked us to talk him off the ledge. Said specifically, "Hey, I don't know what to think. I'm worried we're going downhill. Help me talk off the ledge." We've lost once since then. One time since then.
Yeah. Turns out the ledge was not necessary.
No.
Some of us did try to say that then.
I think we got through to him in the end, but I feel like everything that we said, the reasons why he didn't need to jump off the ledge, happened, essentially. We got some injured people back. Booker is playing out of his mind lately. Chris Paul is becoming what we thought Chris Paul would be. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously the temptation here is to overcorrect and be like, well, we were in a bad stretch, now we're awesome, so we're going to win the title, and no one's going to stop us, and blah, 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 right? However, I still think there's some merit to the idea that no stretch of games should cause too big of a swing, at least not that small. You know, if we're 40 games into the season and we're 15 and 25, okay, at that point it's probably already past the point at which we should be signaling the alarm of okay, we're clearly just bad. But one rough stretch. Now, again, some of those losses were bad. The Wizards one in particular was atrocious. Mm-hmm. And, there isn't really any way to forgive that one loss other than to say it was one loss in a long season. And I think we even mentioned in that show a season in which a lot of teams have been blown out one night or another because of COVID issues, because of injury issues, because of a shortened off season. Whatever the case is, it's happened on a number of occasions.
Schedule issues, I think, is underrated. The weird wonkiness of this schedule, the fact that it's long homestands, long road trips, a lot of back-to-backs, 3 games, 4 nights, stuff like that. It's just, I think there's going to be those times where people run into those schedule losses. Fortunately, lately that hasn't happened for us, so that's nice to see.
We'll see how that affects the second half of the schedule. We'll have to now fit 3 East Coast games into the schedule that's already been set aside. Now, part of the reason the NBA scheduled it this way was to allow for the flexibility for the second half to adjust, but some teams have not had any games postponed. Some teams have had more than we have had postponed, so they'll be even under a greater imposition. Washington was going to have to figure out how to make up, 8 games or something?
Yeah, something like that, which is just... I think they've probably been hit the hardest more than anybody, which is going to be interesting to see their reaction to everything when their season won't matter at the end of the year. But they're well, we got to get in 72 games, so I know you're not going to make the playoffs, but come on, play games, guys.
Come on, Bradley Beal. I know you're already disgruntled, but if you could just go ahead and be a little extra gruntled, that would be tremendous.
If you can just go out there and put your ass on the line again for meaningless games just so other teams can get their season in, we'd appreciate that, buddy. We're going to pay you $200 million a year for it.
Mm-hmm. So, with no Shaun here, you're going to have much more of a reasonable talk about this. That's not really meant to be a diss. It's just, we have sort of been more even keel about this the entire time. That said, even I will admit I would not have thought they would win 9 of their next 10. Mm-mm. Even at my most optimistic, I would have been they go 7-3 or 8-2 over this next stretch, because we knew they had a homestand coming up. And while home games have not mattered a ton in the NBA this season, it is still better to be home than away, barely. But more importantly, it was against some Eastern teams. Now, in this stretch, they have beaten Milwaukee and Philadelphia, and as of recording, this is Monday night because of a weird week coming up. One of the reasons we're doing it early is because they're playing Brooklyn on Tuesday night. Hopefully that game went well. No Kevin Durant. So they played some, the best the East has to offer, basically. Those are the top 3 teams in the East as of recording, and then some bottom feeders too, but even those weren't guaranteed because of what happened against Washington. And, to me, it was okay, I went into this thinking 5-2 would be a good homestand. Well, they're already 6-0. So no matter what happens or happened Tuesday night, it's well, now we're free rolling. If we lose, Brooklyn's still really good. They're almost impossible to beat with all three, but that's only a 6-1 sample size. So with no Durant, I'll take my chances.
Yeah. I mean, what we've looked at essentially is the worst case scenario against the three best teams in the East is worst case scenario against the three best teams in the East is 2-1, which in a great season in the Steve Nash years, we'd have been like, all right, cool. I'm good with that. 2-1 against the three best teams in the other conference. That's a good showing against potential finals contenders. Not that we're saying the Suns are contenders yet. I think we got a little, not get ahead of ourselves here, but against top talent in this league, I mean, we're one of the 5 teams that beat the Jazz. That says something. We beat the best teams in the East. That says something. If we can get our shit together against the bottom feeders, we could be a really, really good team.
That was why the Orlando victory on Sunday was so heartening as opposed to disheartening. Because it was the first time it felt like almost all season, not exactly. There was a Pelicans win in there, especially back when the Pelicans were their worst. But for the first time, it was like, this is a team we should beat. We dispatched them quickly, effortlessly. Yes, they were shorthanded, but they're also the Magic, so I don't give a shit. And, when I found out about that, I didn't even watch that game. That's the first game I have not watched in a while because we had other stuff going on. So to hear it was like, oh, they won by 19. They were up by like 25 at the end of 3. They pretty much coasted. It was like, great. To me, it's a bigger deal to beat Philadelphia if when we look at this on the scale. I don't know who's better between Philadelphia and Milwaukee, whichever. Beating those two teams was huge, right? To me, I was almost more encouraged by the Orlando win because that was like, okay, at their best, you can flip a coin against the best teams. They happen to be better down the stretch and they won both games. That's cool. Not a guarantee. They should be beating Orlando 8 times out of 10, if not more.
Well, it's the way. It's totally the way we beat them, like you said. The fact that we came out, I think we were up 14-2 at one point to start that game. And then at one point at halftime, we're up by 20 some odd. And then, like I said, at the end of the third, we're up 25. That's how we should beat a bottom feeder. Booker came out and scored 18 in the first quarter, which was just like, okay, he's fine. I think he's kind of figured it out with Chris Paul. I think he's kind of figured out that the way that he needs to get his buckets in this offense. And in the past few games, he's scoring 32 a game or something along those lines in the past 3 or 4 games. I mean, we've shown he can go on runs like this, and it looks like he's hitting one of these runs. And I don't know that it's not going to go like this where he scores 35 a night, but he's going to score 27, 28 a night the rest of the season, I would venture to think.
I think so. Finally was named Western Conference Player of the Week. First time in his career, which obviously we're homers, but at the same time, I like to think we can be relatively objective. I mean, the dude had games, I think he scored 50 like 3 times in 4 games a couple of years ago or something, and it's like, really? This is the first time he's been Western Conference Player of the Week? Really?
Yeah. That stretch where he scored 60, 59, and then 52 at 3 out of 4 games, and Jimmer Fredette's the only reason he didn't have 2 60-point games in a week, was like, that's not enough to be Player of the Week? Okay.
I don't know exactly how those weeks broke down, but at least 2 of those games were in one of the weeks. Just that has to be statistically true. So like, I saw that being mentioned even before the Orlando game, just because he had played so well in those pivotal wins against good Eastern Conference teams. It was nice to see it come to fruition because the immediate thought was like, "No, he's going to get shunned again. League hates the Suns. Woe is us. Blah blah blah." So to your point, yeah, he's found another level, and it shows in his efficiency. He was 10 of 16 against Orlando, like you said. He outscored their whole team in the first quarter. He seems like he's finally found his stride. He also looks like he did in the bubble again, so maybe there was a nagging injury or he just wasn't in full condition. That's the most underrated part of this entire season to me is like, forget COVID, which has had a massive impact, but that shortened off season, if you're used to a usual rhythm and you go through an off season, where you have a summer, you take time away and then you start gearing up your training individually and then you have a full off season, a preseason with your team, all of that was disrupted. It was why I started leaning towards the Jazz before the season as being better than the Suns. That one looks good. And it seems like it's bearing fruit because, they have continuity. The Suns have a brand new point guard. That's not to say it's an excuse, but they don't have that same continuity that a team like the Jazz does, or the Lakers, where it's like, okay, there's some new pieces there, but it's LeBron and AD, so like they're going to handle the ball most of the time.
Well, and actually it's interesting that you mentioned comparing Utah, comparing Phoenix is a really interesting case study if you look at those two, because you look at Phoenix, we had, like I said, a new point guard, Chris Paul, who is fantastic player, obviously. Like, you cannot deny how good of a point guard he is. One of the top obviously top 10 point guards all time. He is so fundamentally different from Ricky Rubio, though. Rubio doesn't pull up the mid ranges like Chris Paul does, and Chris Paul's slow, which Rubio is tend to get out on the break, run, and I think that took a long time for the stayovers from last year's team to kind of adjust to a little bit more methodical type of offense, a little bit more. I don't want to say plotting because I mean our offensive numbers have been fantastic in the past couple weeks, but it took a long time to get used to that, as opposed to Utah, who just kind of said, all right, let's run this thing back. We'll keep doing what we were doing. We're a playoff team last year. We're a missed Mike Conley 3 away from making the second round. Not to mention Mike Conley's playing way better than he did last year, so good for him. But I think what that's going to bear out to is that the Jazz might have a little bit of a downward trajectory coming up here, and the Suns might keep having that upward trajectory that we've seen as the Suns figure each other out and then teams figure out Utah.
Yeah, the question of how good any team ultimately is an interesting one. The Lakers, of course, are in trouble now because Anthony Davis is probably out for 4 to 6 weeks. Reevaluate in 2 to 3, so a good prognosis could mean something better. But regardless, I mean, that's a significant chunk of this season. I'm not saying the Suns are going to catch them, but to me that opens the door more than it was before. Utah, like you said, really, really good start. It does feel like it's overachieving to some extent, and that's not me being a hater. It's like, are the Jazz really a 22-5 pace team? I mean, if they are, they should win the title. But they're probably not. So the question is, what will happen when they tail off? I don't know. Their starting lineup is really, really good, and Conley's been much better, and Jordan Clarkson might be 6th man of the year. So, like, that has to matter for something. But can we catch them? I don't know. The one thing they do have going for them, if this were to hold up, it's a long ways to go yet. If they're the 1 seed, if they can hold off the Clippers and Lakers, don't even have to go through both of them then. Which is also true if the Suns finish 4th in that scenario. That's what it is right now. It's way too early to say. But if they went into this the way it is currently constructed, we wouldn't have to go through the Lakers and Clippers either.
How crazy would that be? Because, like I said, we're one of the 5 teams to beat the Jazz, which is amazing in its own right. Each the Suns and the Jazz are 9-1 in their last 10 games, and I would feel way more confident against the Jazz than I would the Lakers or Clippers in the playoffs. Like, to get to the Western Conference Finals, I have thought we really need to get up to the top 3 seed so that we don't have to play the Lakers in round 2. But that would be crazy if it works out that way, where we got up to the 3 seed, overtook the Clippers, and then had to play the Lakers in the second round. That would kind of suck in a way, almost.
Kind of, yeah. And the one thing about the Jazz, to give them credit, because I don't want to slander them too much, they play well, and I don't really harbor any ill will towards them. They're 9-1 over their last 10, and they're 9-1 over their last 10 too.
Yeah, the previous 10, yeah.
Their last 10 and the other 10. So they're 18-2 in the last 20, basically. That's a cute way of saying, which is a really, really good stretch, and it makes sense. I mean, that also basically represents their entire season. One of those 3 losses before that stretch was the Suns, so maybe we didn't even catch them at their peak. They damn sure didn't catch us at ours, so who can say, right?
Yeah.
I will say this. It's too early to start worrying about playoff matchups and potential seedings and how good we are ultimately. Are we really a contender? It is lovely to be almost 30 games into the season and even be considering those things as possibilities. And we've talked about this on the show before, but having it actually happen and not pretending like it could happen is just really nice of its own. We could lose, 7 of the next 10, and that would suck, and I'd be bummed, but I'd be like, hey, for a time, we represented an actually good basketball team. Not like a 2-game stretch, but an actual bona fide stretch.
And not even a 10-game stretch like last year where we started out 7-4. This is a 26-game stretch where we're like, okay, we are a top 5 team in the league right now, I think.
And while it's unfair to bring the bubble in this because the team is different, a lot of the players are the same. Regardless of what the roster is and how much you attribute this, it is still a fact that we've also won 9 straight before this season, so we're something like 26-9 in our recent Suns memory. Which is Steve Nash era pace. So it's wow, we went from losing 60 games a season to we've won 25 of our last 35. What the hell's happening?
I wish I could find this chart, but there was a chart out there that showed in the past 5 years the date in which the Suns won their 17th game each of the past 5 years. And it's depressing in especially 2018, 2019, when we won our 17th game of the season on like March 15th or something along those lines, where it's like, oh God.
And
Oh,
of
this is
course, the
terrible.
elephant in the room, especially for fans who are not as into the NBA, is the season started late, so it really should be earlier than this if you just moved the start of the season. Forget the other complications with that. It probably should have been about this time in January if the season had been on its normal pace, maybe a smidge sooner.
Yeah. I mean, and not to mention, like you said, you throw in the fact we missed training camp and everything like that. It might have been even earlier. Who knows if we could have got out together sooner. Regardless of that, when you're looking at how we're playing, I'm looking at the rest of the Western Conference. The only team below us that worries me really is the Nuggets, I think. I mean, the Trailblazers have been hit by injuries, and somehow they're just hanging around. They got alligator blood, I guess. The Spurs are the Spurs. They just keep doing what they're doing. And then there's just a jumble of other teams down below them. But I think we're better than all of them. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. The only team in the West I don't think that we have at least a chance to be better than is the Lakers. And that's not to say we couldn't maybe beat them in a series. Just I would not pick us against them.
Mm-hmm.
I would at least give consideration to every other team in the West, including Utah, including the Clippers. I wouldn't. I'm not saying I would. We'll see where we're at the end of the season. Hopefully, we're in a playoff spot, and we'll do a whole cast. Because believe you me, when the Suns are about to go into their first playoff in a fucking decade, we're gonna do a podcast about it.
Yeah, we were talking about this off air last week, but we've literally never done this podcast when the Suns have been a playoff team.
Yeah.
Ever. We started the year after they made the playoffs for the last time. So
yeah,
to
your
we're gonna
point,
have to
like yeah, there are concerns in the West. The West is really good, and any of those teams is a stretch like ours away from being considered like, oh shit, like they're an upper echelon team, which includes guys like Dallas, who have been all over the place so far, and Portland when they get healthy, and like you said, have been maintaining pretty well. And yes, even New Orleans, even though I think they continue to be overhyped, if they rolled off 8 wins in 10 games, all of a sudden they're right in the mix. So like, there's a ton that can still happen, and that's why the point of this is not to be like, yeah, the Suns are great, but just let us have this is all.
Yep. Actually, you mentioned the Pelicans. It's them and the Lakers are for some reason the teams that almost scare me the most, and I think it's due to their size. Really, we got hammered by the Pelicans when we played them last time, and that having Steven Adams and Zion Williamson down low, and us missing Dario at the same time, that was just vicious for that game. I don't know, like they destroyed us inside quickly in that game.
I mean, that was almost the genesis of the streak, though, because it caused Kaminsky to be inserted into the starting lineup. And he's played well in that role, even though now, since Sarge has come back, I mean, he's not playing as much. He still starts, maybe plays 15 minutes, and that's it. I did go into that. I don't know everything. I've been wrong plenty of times. You want proof, go back and watch a few past episodes of Sunscast and see some of the things I was not right about. When Cam Johnson was in the starting lineup for that game and matched up against Zion, I was like,
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is. Kaminsky's not that strong either. Not much better defensively against bigs, and certainly not better than Cam overall defensively. So I don't know what the choice was, because you can't have like Cam guard Steven Adams either, because he's a physical force.
Mm-hmm.
But just looking at that construction, I was like, oh God.
Yeah.
Like, there's a very few people that can guard Zion right now, and while he has his faults defensively, offensively he's a beast, right? Cam Johnson sure as hell isn't the one.
Exactly.
Maybe we didn't have an answer, but I knew that wasn't it. And if there is no answer that's correct, then yeah, we're in trouble.
Yeah. Oh, and that's the other problem with the Lakers, obviously, is they've got bigs. They've got size just everywhere on the court. So it's really tough to play a team like the Lakers. So those are really the ones that worry me. But the Pelicans might take care of themselves, which is great.
I'm looking over the dog because she's chewing a toy that's probably going to be ripped apart in a moment here, and I don't want her to eat the inside of it.
No.
But it's fine. This is just happening live because there's no one else around, and now she's walking over here and she's left it. Great.
Good. Fixed itself.
Yeah, it's great though. We just do these things live. We don't worry about it.
We'll do it live.
Yeah, we just roll with the punches. It's not a problem. So I'm torn on this because I'm hoping that this isn't the height of the season. I don't think it will be. Mm-hmm. I think there are still more peaks and valleys to come, and hopefully more peaks than valleys. There's no pun intended with that. Even so, it's like these last 10 games in particular are like the perfect summation of the style of basketball I want to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought perhaps the bubble was going to be that, but I actually prefer this, even though the pace is slower, because in the fast break, you almost have to have that sharing of the ball and generating positive looks. It's why it's so lucrative to be able to do it. and so damaging when you can't in the playoffs. This has some of the similar spacing and sharing the ball in the half-court set, and it's just a joy to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And even when we're not playing well, I don't really have a huge problem with the quality of looks we're getting on a nightly basis, which was why I was convinced that we would turn this around when we had the last Suns cast, because I'm like, they're getting good looks. The offense is doing its job, and either we're going to have a flukishly bad entire season of shooting, or it's going to regress to the mean, and that's going to improve.
Yeah, and you look at just the way we move the ball, the shots that we get, and I think the biggest thing is that we're willing to take threes, and especially if we're making them. I think, then we're really unbeatable if everybody's making threes. When Mikal, there's something that's going around on Suns Twitter right now called the Bridges Law, which is if he makes his first 3-pointer of the game, the Suns win like 80% of the time or something like that. So it's if we're making our threes, Mikal, Crowder, and Cam Johnson especially are hitting their threes, we're really tough to beat. But in those games where we're not, I think the second of the two Mavericks games we played was one that really came to mind, where we weren't shooting fantastically well, I don't think, but yet we came in and we got we got into the bucket. Chris Paul and Devin Booker are just killers from mid-range. So having that kind of backup plan almost is really good to see, us being able to get in there and have another way to win besides, well, threes aren't falling, I guess we're screwed.
One of the biggest keys, I think, is that they've been doing a lot more inside-outside, and the number of threes that they've been taking is going down. I'm actually trying to pull this up because even during this successful stretch, it's been 32 to 35 a night almost every night, and a handful of those, they didn't even make that many of them. I mean, just last night, that was an easy win. They shot like 13 of 32 from three, I think.
12 of 37.
Okay, so even worse. And Jay Crowder, I know this one's right, was 4 of 13 from the field and 4 of 13 from three. So he was the epitome of chucking, but that was what the offense required at that time. And 4 for 13 is not horrendous. It's not ideal, but it's not like a god-awful night. They've been doing it inside, and that's with a variety of looks. Some of that is mid-range and not traditional inside. But nonetheless, they're forcing their will on opponents now in a way that we have not seen in some time. They were settling for good but not great threes earlier in the season when they were up and down more. Since then, now it's like, yeah, we'll take threes, and if anything, this change has benefited Booker the most. He's been really efficient from three in the stretch. But we're not going to rely on them. We can take a halfway decent three with 18 left in the shot clock, but if we're going to get a better look than that, why settle for that?
I've seen times where I have said, oh, shoot that. And then we pass out of the three, and we get either mid-range jumper at the elbow, DeAndre Ayton dunk, Mikal Bridges cut, or maybe we end up shooting a three at the end of the shot clock. But I see it's happened too many times. I'm like, oh, you got to shoot that. Oh, okay, we got a better shot. Fantastic. All right, I'm okay with that. Like, the ball movement is just so quick. That 0.5 offense that they've talked about sounds like it should be faster than it is, even though our pace is so slow. But it's fun to watch it. Just the ball just zip around.
I'm looking at the stats now. I have them up.
All right.
We lost 5 of 6 at one point. We were 4 of 27 from three against Washington, so it wasn't too many threes, just we couldn't make a goddamn shot. And let's not pretend like Washington is any good defensively, so that clearly has to be a failing on our own part, right?
That's on us, yeah.
However, there's also 44 threes in a loss to Denver, 53 threes in a loss to Denver in overtime, double overtime, 43 threes in a loss to OKC, and
52
then
threes
right
in a
after
loss
that,
to the Pistons.
yeah, right after that is when the stretch starts with the win against the Warriors, and it's 32, 22, 35, 35, 32, 29, 24, 31, 25, and then this 12 of 37, and I don't even know how much of that was garbage time. I have no idea. Maybe it wasn't. I haven't looked at the box score in the fourth quarter to see. Regardless, we didn't even need it. It didn't matter because that game was a blowout from pretty much the word jump. So that to me has been the key, because this is a good team in a lot of aspects. Defensively, we know they're top 5. Free throw shooting, they're number 2 in the league. So if you can get inside more, you get better looks. You're generating good mid-range looks for 2 of the best mid-range shooters in the game, and hopefully you're getting more foul attempts. We'll talk about that in a minute. Ideally, you might get more foul attempts and then take advantage of the fact that everyone on your roster, just like they can shoot the three, except Damian Jones, can also shoot the free throw.
Well, and when all of that put together, like you mentioned a little bit ago, when you put all of that together, if Booker and Chris Paul can get in and shoot those mid-range shots, Ayton can be a vacuum and bring people in on the interior. Booker actually threw a decent lob the other day, which I thought was kind of crazy. Like it happened where he threw an alley-oop and Ayton dunked it.
There's been a couple.
It's crazy. But you do all of that, and then you throw on top. Then we can get people like Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges and Langston Galloway if he's feeling it that day, hitting threes off of that when everybody gets drawn inside. Man, that's a team that is to be reckoned with, I think.
That's what makes me think that this isn't a fluke. And I'm not saying they're going to sustain a 90% win rate for the rest of the season, just that I do think this could still be exactly what we thought it could be before the season, which is a 4 or 5 seed in the West that can be scary come playoff time, especially depending on how the matchups break down.
Yep.
And again, if we're in the playoffs, that's already a huge step for us. If we're in the playoffs with a good chance to win at least one round, and then, who knows from there, depending on injuries and luck and matchups, I don't know how much more we could ask for, because you don't just become a contender overnight. Maybe we are, but I don't think of us that way yet, and we haven't earned that yet. But the fact that you can even consider that as a fringe case, like, god damn, that's interesting.
It has been interesting seeing the amount of media attention that the Suns have been getting lately. I mean, Devin Booker was a headline piece on ESPN.com, which finally, it's only taken 6 years. It's only taken 6 years, and this guy, obliterating team scoring records and setting the league on fire and getting the respect of the rest of the league, too. It feels like the media's lack of attention on him has caused people like Kevin Durant, some of the bigger names in the game really loving Devin Booker. But the media attention's been there where Booker got this major piece. The Suns have been on ESPN frequently lately. I think the past couple of weeks, I think we've had 3 or 4 games on ESPN, which hasn't happened in the past at all.
Nope.
Bill Simmons has started talking about it on the Sunscast, saying he likes what the Suns are doing. People who are before the Jump, the TV show The Jump, they're finally talking about the Suns positively and not talking about the GOAT that was in Ryan McDonough's office. They seem to actually be talking about, hey, this team is good all of a sudden, and we know it's not all of a sudden, but that's how they're kind of treating it. Like, hey, nation, the Suns are good.
It feels strange.
Yeah, it does.
Because I remember this from the Nash era. I remember this from the KJ Barkley era. I went through both of them. I was too young to really appreciate it back in the day, but I was there for it. I remember the hype. And now, again, it doesn't matter how many times we talk about it on this show. The fact remains that we've wasted an entire decade watching garbage basketball that should rightfully have been shunned by the national media for most of that stretch. There's the one fluke 48-win season and one other halfway decent one, and that's it, right? So now to see this, it's almost like I almost feel like a Suns hipster, where I'm like, don't give me your fucking attention now. Like, Bill Simmons, don't pretend like you like the Suns. I've listened to you trash us for the last 6 years, even though we deserve some of it.
And trash the Chris Paul trade. I will not let him forget that he trashed the fact the Suns made that trade, which is stupid of him.
Well, it's the same thing with Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges, which he was not alone in either, so it's not like just to throw shade at him.
Yeah.
And we've talked about those before, so we don't need to go into them here. I will say this now, as kind of a segue, because we just mentioned him. Maybe this is the Devin Booker loyalist in me, but I feel like Paul is getting just a smidge too much credit for this turnaround. Just a little bit. He deserves some of it for sure. But it feels like it's like, well, this is what Chris Paul does. He wins. And I'm like, yes. And OKC got off to a similar start last year, and they were very good in the end too. This team was already on the way, and the bubble was the thing that people pointed to as proof of that. Maybe we're not here without Paul. I'm not saying that he's been bad. He's been great. He deserves some of these accolades. But I think for people who don't pay enough attention, it's the one thing they point to, because that's what's different, right? So the Suns were trash last year. Now they have Chris Paul, so that must be why. And it's like, it's not that simple.
No. The amount of roster depth on this team comparatively to last year's team. I mean, we improved last year's team greatly over the year before, where we had no depth whatsoever. 2 years ago, if the starters came out, we were screwed. We were done for. If any of the stars got hurt, we were done for. Last year, we got better, where we had a little bit of depth. This year, my God, we're having to sit people like Javon Carter, who've played well for us, or Etuan Moore has played really well when in spots. But we're putting people did not play coach's decision who can get minutes for NBA teams, and we're having them sit at the end of the bench and not play entire games.
Yep.
That is so different from the past decade. I can't even wrap my mind around it.
In the Sixers game, there was some brief garbage time. We only ended up winning by 9, but it was like 13 with just under 2 minutes left, and Doc pulled everybody, and then we pulled everybody. And in that game, because we were fully healthy for the first time this season, by the way, we had a garbage time lineup of 5 NBA players. Like, there was no Tyshawn Alexander, that's his name, right?
Yeah.
And Jalen Smith, I think, was the one exception. I think maybe he played. I don't remember. The point is, like, you could look at this and be like, these are our last 5 guys on a 15-man bench.
Mm-hmm.
And they could play and have played at points this season meaningful minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And we couldn't even surround Booker with 5 players, period, before last season. And then this season obviously improved, like you mentioned. You look at some of those rosters, and we did this off air after we recorded last week. It is utter trash. And the suggestion that Booker was somehow piling up empty stats when he had those fucking people to pass to is by far the biggest sign of somebody who doesn't watch the NBA close enough.
Mm-hmm.
If that's their take and you look at those rosters, you're just out of your mind.
So I agree with you that Chris Paul has gotten a smidge too much attention, and I think you really should put it on Booker. And if you had to pick one Suns All-Star, if we're looking at that, it probably to me is Booker because of maybe what he's meant to the team more so over the past few years than just this season, but also what he's been doing the past 2 weeks. I mean, he's just obliterating people. I mean, it feels like he's toying with people at times in certain ways, with certain jab steps he does, or the logo 3 in Ben Simmons' face, which all of Sun social media went crazy saying that he was just doing that to show up Kendall's ex. I thought it was funny. Kendall Jenner, that is. Sure. But it seems like he's toying with people. And if I had to pick one of the two between Chris Paul or Devin Booker, I'd absolutely pick Booker to be our all-star. I hope they both get in because I actually do think they're both deserving. The West is just so loaded.
Yeah, they won't. There's a decent chance neither one of them gets in, which
is and
scary.
In a way, I'd actually be okay with that happening too, because I could see both of them taking that with a massive chip on their shoulder and be like, oh, I'm not an all-star, huh? Well, I'm going to go be an all-NBA. Show you fuckers.
It is a little frustrating watching Zion, who I think has a compelling case and maybe should be an all-star, but the Pelicans suck.
Mm-hmm.
And for 2 years there, the thing against Booker was, well, the numbers are fine, but his team sucks. And it's like, first of all, that's not really how the all-star game works. This is not all-NBA, where I think that could and should be more of a factor. But second of all, like, if he's really good and his surrounding cast sucks, then why are you punishing him? Mm-hmm. Zion's surrounding cast is better than anything Devin Booker ever played with before last season. So it is a little bit, again, this is us being homers. That's one time I'll admit it, but I'm like, man, fuck Zion.
Yeah.
His numbers are phenomenal, even though it's defensively not that great. Again, it's the All-Star game, so defense shouldn't be that much of a factor. But I see that, and I think if Zion gets in at the expense of both Paul and Booker, I will be somewhat pissed at him. And he's done nothing to deserve that, but I'll still be pissed.
The other dirty little secret the NBA doesn't like to talk about is that's exactly what Doncic is doing.
Yeah, I was going to say him too.
He's playing amazing. He's had phenomenal games. I think he had a triple-double the other night, like a 40-point triple-double the other night. He's playing phenomenally. His team is better than anything Booker had behind him the past few years. He's got Kristaps Porzingis, who is not as good as obviously he was in New York, but he's got NBA players around him. And yet, he's not winning. They're below 500 right now. They lost the other night, and now 2 games under 500. I mean, they're not playing well, and yet he is a write him in and Sharpie as a starter on the All-Star team. Part of that's fan vote, I get that, but even the media would vote him in as a starter right now.
Yep, and he should be an All-Star.
I think
Full
so.
Stop. Not even qualifying it. But I agree with you, and I've said this to you guys when we've watched Suns games off air, not recording it. The reckoning is coming for him, and it starts at the end of this season. Mm-hmm. He's going to hit the same wall that Booker did if that team misses the playoffs, because now it's going to be, is Luka putting up empty stats for a team that should be better than it is? Because the surrounding cast isn't that different from last season. Okay? That's one thing that we have to make sure people remember. Yes, Seth Curry, but that's about the only difference. And sure, Porzingis hasn't been healthy the whole time, but that's kind of the MO for his whole career.
He wasn't healthy last year.
Where it's like, I can only forgive that to a certain extent. You knew the player you were getting when you acquired him. Mm-hmm. So if that was the guy you wanted to put next to Luka as his number 2, that's the risk you took. I think the idea was that they were going to be able to attract a third star, and that hasn't happened yet. But guess what? That's also the case in Dallas over the last 15 years. They've continuously struck out in free agency, even though they are a pretty good destination with a good head coach and 2 cornerstone franchise players in first Dirk and then Luka. So
Mhm.
all of that is to say, I agree with you. Luka's going to be in there. He might even be a starter. He should be. But there's these whispers where I'm like, just call it the same way. If you're going to use those complaints against Booker, you better start applying them to other players that fit the same mold.
And Zion's going to be that way after next year, I think, is going to be his reckoning if the Pelicans miss the playoffs again next year. And if
He
they
has an
miss
all-star playing next to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Ingram may have gotten better this year, and he's not even really being considered for a spot. He doesn't have the same numbers, but I would argue his game is more complete. And they're still this bad.
Yeah. From a very schadenfreude way, God, I hope the Mavericks miss the playoffs. I would love to see the national media freak out on Luka.
100%. I don't want to play him in the playoffs. He was really good in the playoffs last year. But, at the same time, to shove it to certain teams, I don't want to see Portland make it. I have no idea why I have this grudge against Portland. I have no clue. Clue.
I actually like him.
Dame Lillard's a great dude from everything I've read about him, like off the court, and he's carrying this team as more bodies keep falling every season, and I have really no logical reason to hate them. I want them to miss the playoffs. Maybe it's just because I don't want to see him drop 60 on us for a series if they happen to match up with them. But either way, I'm like, I want them to miss the playoffs. I don't know why. I don't feel that same way towards, like, even the Spurs at this point. Now that they've missed a year and that streak is over, and even them, I'm like, whatever, sure.
I can't hate. It's weird that Damian Lillard is the one guy who's almost getting shit on for being loyal. I feel like everyone shits on people for not being loyal, and Damian Lillard's like, dude, you got to get out of there. Like, you can't keep going at this pace. He's being loyal. He's staying with his team, and people are almost, I feel like, starting to turn on him for being loyal.
It's because there's a very fine line in the sand that separates enough success to not enough success. It's why you can't say the same thing about Kevin Durant, because that team was in the finals once and 2 Western Conference finals, and then he joined the team that beat him. Now, I think that argument's overblown, but I recognize the difference. In Dame's case, they made 8 conference finals, got curb stomped, and they haven't really done a whole lot other than that, right? They won a couple series here and there. So for him, it's like people will say to him, it's dumb he hasn't tried to go somewhere else. But the thin line between that and what Kevin Durant did exists, because for that, it was he's a traitor. Neither one of them had won a title. They were both in their prime and heading to their sub-prime of their career. The difference for Lillard is he was loyal. And like you said, that should be rewarded. We should want to see more players like a Kobe who want to stay, or a Dirk, who want to stay with their franchise the entire career. But they haven't been good enough. So now it's like, well, why is he still there? It's amazing to me. It's a success. There's a line there, and there's a tenure. Because if you're there past your second contract, that's the point at which it's like, well, now you've had your max or supermax extension, so now you could have just done whatever. So if you pass that up, there's a contingency of fans in the NBA that are like, he's got to go get his ring. Whatever he wants to do, he's put in his time. And it's like, okay, well, Kevin Durant played for 10 years for the fucking Thunder. They traded away all of his surrounding cast except Russ, who I don't think he liked, and then he bailed. Maybe they don't like the way he bailed. Again, we've been down that road. But, like, at the end of the day, he put in his time. Nobody can say that Durant didn't play his heart out for the fucking Thunder. So then what do you want? What do you want from Dame Lillard?
Yeah. I don't know. I respect the hell out of the guy for that reason. So
yeah. I have nothing but respect for him, but I want to see him miss the playoffs. I've thought about it. I can't honestly tell you why it's the case, but it absolutely is. I hope he gets a non-career threatening injury and they lose 30 games of the last 40 and they miss the playoffs.
For some reason, I feel that way about the Jazz, I think. And that's not going to happen this year, obviously, because they're too good of a team. But, like, I have an irrational hatred for the Jazz. And it's not Donovan Mitchell's fault, but I hate him.
It's a little bit Gobert's fault.
It's a little bit, yes.
I think he's paid his penance for what he did at the start of the coronavirus outbreak. I think he's been raked over the coals for that enough.
Yeah.
But it still happened. And as somebody who works in journalism, me especially, I'm like, man, fuck that.
Yeah.
I know you didn't know what we know now. I know that's not fair, but you knew something was wrong, and you're still like, oh, touch. It's like, come on, dude. Like, it's not a joke.
And it's not even, it probably wasn't even something that actually was dangerous that someone got hurt off of. It's the optics of it. It's you're playing glib at this, which, all of a sudden, 2 days after you did the touch, oh, you're infected and the rest of the league is shut down. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for screwing us over.
I have to hope and or assume that there was a moment where he was like, oh. When that news first broke as it was happening, to his team, you know that in private or with his like close circle of friends, he had to be like, I fucked up.
Yeah, yeah.
And, from there, it's like, well, how do you show contrition? Like, do you not say anything? To a certain extent, he couldn't do anything because he had to go quarantine. Like he couldn't be in front of the media and be like, look, that was my bad. We hadn't really hit here yet, and I didn't know how serious it was. I do now, and I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. So I think part of that wasn't even his fault. At the end of the day, though, that still lingers with me. Fans are a fickle bunch. The root of it is like the word fanatic, so we're obviously a little bit bipolar sometimes. That was one of those where he's going to have to do a lot more before he redeems himself in my eyes.
Yeah, I get that. I'm a little less harsh on it. I mean, obviously, I thought it was stupid, but I think I hated them before all of that too, and it's because I'm irrationally defensive of Devin Booker. And when people are saying Donovan Mitchell is better than him, I'm like, no, he's not. Stop that. Stop that right now.
Which he might make another All-Star team, and Booker might not.
I know. Which I mean, and that's for winning. Even though Mitchell's having probably his best statistical season he's had so far, and is probably most deserving of it this year, I think. But so is Booker.
There was somebody, maybe Kevin O'Connor, but I don't think so. I think it was somebody else. Some other podcast I was watching recently where somebody was saying like they were close on Booker making the All-Star team, but his true shooting percentage wasn't where they wanted it to be. I guess they want him above 60%, which he was last season and is almost this season now after this stretch. Donovan Mitchell's like 5% worse than that. And he was on the team. And I'm like, so what's the difference then? Because Mitchell's surrounding cast is as good or better. And if it's as simple as like, oh, he's just a player I depend on more in the fourth quarter, it's like you're letting last season's bubble play and the first round especially influence your decision. And that's not how All-Star games work. It's supposed to be reflective of the games this season thus far.
How could you possibly want... I mean, there are a few players in this league I want taking the last shot more than Devin Booker. Not a lot, though. And I don't think Donovan Mitchell's one of them because, good Lord, that man takes over games in the fourth quarter by himself.
And Mitchell's really good. I think he's one of the 10 or 15 best I would want to go to in the fourth quarter. But the idea that it's like, oh, he's this. It's like, Devin Booker's also that. You just haven't had a chance to see it. That's the big difference between the two. He has not had that platform. He has not had that playoff appearance. Like, I was looking at Russell Westbrook today just to see how bad his numbers were and laugh at it. And, other than his triple-double counting stats, they're pretty bad. And he's played 108 playoff games in his career. He's 32 now, so he's getting up there. But, 108 playoff games, and Devin Booker hasn't played any.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw what he did last season in the bubble, where those were effectively win-or-die games, especially the last one, where they had to win to have a chance at making the playoffs. The dude showed up. It is homerism again, but I'm like, you can't build a compelling case for Mitchell that doesn't include Booker being right there with him. You can say he's a little better than Booker. I don't even really have a problem with that, even though I'd like it to not be true. But the idea that he's like head and shoulders above is wrong.
I look at it from the angle of if you had to pick somebody to start a franchise and you're going to have maybe not great players around you, you're not going to have a defensive just juggernaut like Gobert is or a game-controlling point guard like Conley can be. I would much rather start with Booker, who can get his own buckets, before I'd start with Mitchell, who can get his own buckets, not to the efficiency and rate that Booker can.
I talked about this with Shaun the other night. I forget which of the two Eastern Conference Powers games it was, but it's like he has every shot in his bag now.
Everyone.
And we've watched that evolve over time because he didn't used to have a left hand. Mm-hmm. And he then worked a lot on his post game in between years like 2 and 3. And then he went to the basket a lot more fiercely with a lot more options around the rim the last couple of years, which is why his 2-point percentage went up like 7 or 8%. He's just been working on it consistently. Never a huge leap. You can argue year 3 to 4 was a big leap, but he's just consistently gotten better at every aspect of the offensive side of the game. And his defense has been okay this year.
Mm-hmm.
Not great, probably not even good, but okay. And that's all it needs to be if these are the other 4 around him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. They mentioned post play. There was one play in particular. I can't remember if it was either the Sixers or the Magic, where Booker got the ball on the low block, on the right block, and was double teamed. I think it was the Magic game. He was double teamed, and he kicked it out and hit it, and they hit a 3, and Mikal Bridges hit a 3. And it's like, if you're gonna need to double Booker in the post, you're screwed. With our ball movement, if you're going to double Booker in the post, forget it. Like, that ball is going to get passed around and an open shot's going to be taken. It's going to happen if you double Booker. And if you don't double him, that man's turnaround game is amazing. Like, he had a shot against the Cavs that I saw where he came down to the baseline, pivoted one way, flipped back around another, and hit a fadeaway jumper, nothing but net. And it's just like, I don't know how you defend that. There's no way to defend that. And he just does it consistently.
he hits some of the toughest shots of anybody I see. And again, I see more of him than anybody else, but I watch a decent amount of other NBA basketball. It's like him and Bradley Beal are on another level from anybody else I've seen in the league. And that's not, I mean, like LeBron hits his share of tough, but like consistently, especially because they don't have like the physical prowess to get their own shot, or like the lethal shooting of a Steph Curry, who also shoots some difficult shit sometimes. Just like hand in their face, those are the two guys I think of making contested mid-range fadeaways, pull-ups, whatever the case may be. It's weird. And by the way, not to hammer on the supporting cast thing to death, but like I was actually rewatching clips of the 70-point game because I think it was like the anniversary of it or something recently. And the Suns are down 21-3 in that game in the first quarter with like Allen Williams and Tyler Ulis and Marquise Chris starting.
Tyson Chandler.
And they were, I think at one point in the third quarter, he was 6 of 8. Maybe it was like right before halftime. He was 6 of 8, and the rest of the team was 4 for 20.
Yeah.
4 for 20. With him generating that kind of attention and pulling that much of the defense to him. The rest of the team, 4 for 20. We don't have to worry about that with this current roster. You know, it might be streaky. You know, you never know exactly what you're going to get from like McHale and Cam and Jay Crowder. Usually at least one of them is good on a given night. If they're all good, then we win for sure. But at least you know they're going to show up and still contribute in some way defensively, some key plays, some steals, whatever. Back then it was like, I can't even imagine, especially knowing that Booker was like 21 at the time, looking around you, seeing no other NBA players, looking at a team of grown-ass men on the other side, knowing you can still get your buckets, but thinking to yourself, how do I win? What do I have to do to win? And not knowing the answer.
And he kept that game within 10 the entire game, and because our defense was terrible and our other players couldn't score, period, we couldn't win that game, and then get shit on afterward for it. The guy's got mental fortitude, and I appreciate him. I almost appreciate that the most about him, is how much mental fortitude for what he's had to put up with. Yes, he's an NBA player, he's respected by his peers, but the media has ripped on him too much.
Yep, and we also saw that when he had the hamstring injury. Which, you know, coincided with the very beginning of this too. You know, like we were terrible for a stretch, and we've been a lot better since then. Well, when Booker missed 4 games, that was part of the stretch. We were not great. But people actually saw. I saw people questioning, like, well, why didn't he come back in the game? And it's like, if you have watched any meaningful amount of Devin Booker's now 6-year career in the NBA, it is not a lack of competitiveness. It's not a lack of heart. It's not a lack of wanting to get in there and play despite being hurt. Like, it must have been to the point where he couldn't continue. But people were like, oh, he didn't want to come back in. It's just not about winning. It's like, just fucking... Like, I understand that not everybody can know everything about every team, but, like, if you have bad takes, just swallow them.
Yeah.
Or educate yourself. You know, I know that we're in America now where education is almost seen as a bad thing, but just try. Just see how it feels, you know? Give it a shot.
That's why I try not to have too many outlandish takes on other teams that I don't watch as frequently, because obviously I watch one team almost exclusively. I try to watch others a little bit, but one exclusively. I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't spend at least a minute or two on DeAndre Ayton and his defense, because I just remember how he came into the league. Everyone was like, well, he's got some offensive game, but man, he's just a sieve on defense. He's going to be so terrible. You have to overcome that. That man is a rock underneath. He's getting 12 and a half rebounds a game, guarding. I mean, even when Embiid went out for 30, 32 or whatever it was in that game, Ayton kept him out of the paint for the most part. I think Embiid just had a good shooting game, but Ayton made him work for his shots.
I think shoot the ball that well. I want to say he was like 9 for 22 or something. Don't quote me on that though.
Yeah, some of those lines. But the point is, like, if you just look at the box score, you just look at that one game, and it's like, oh well, Embiid had 32. I guess Ayton didn't play very good defense on him. No, he actually did. I think he played really good defense on him and made him work for all of it, even though he scored a lot of points.
I'll fact check myself. 12 to 23. But to your point, he did force him into more jumpers than I think Embiid was comfortable with. And like you said, the end result doesn't always justify the means. There are some really good scorers in this league. Ben Simmons shouldn't have gotten cooked as much as he did because he wasn't guarding Booker the whole game to begin with. And on a couple of Booker's crucial plays in the fourth quarter, he was screened out of the play. And it was actually Embiid as a help side defender who was supposed to come out, and Booker cooked him. So like it wasn't even really on Simmons. You can argue he could have gotten through the screen better, but whatever, right? Same thing here, and also with Mikal Bridges. You know, Mikal's going to take a guy like Luka on some nights, and Luka's going to get, 28, 8, and 8, and it's going to be like, oh, well, is Bridges really that good? It's like, yeah, but did you see how he had to work to get the 28.
Mm-hmm.
But no, because people see the box scores or maybe some highlights, and that's the extent of it. And I get it. I mean, very few people have time to watch a ton of NBA games if it's not their job or like their full-time hobby. But then don't get your weak takes in here.
Yeah.
Don't assume you know everything because you watched one 8-minute highlight clip from one NBA game on YouTube. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. It's nice. I feel like for the first time in my time watching the Suns, pretty much, we have a solid defensive team. The one that we're like, yes, that is a strength of our team is our defense. I don't remember when that's happened.
No, and to bring it back to Aiden, because I didn't actually say anything nice about him.
Please do.
He has been, like you said, a rock defensively. It makes up for the fact that the offense has wilted. We talked about it a bit in the last Suns cast, but I'm not entirely sure what to make of that. I'm glad they're not trying to force it so often, and I wish they could find him a little bit more just to get his reps. But, like, if this is the best Ayton is, and I don't think it is, if the best version of Ayton that we get out of this is a 13-12 guy who is the defensive anchor and maybe a top 5 defensive player in the league, I'm fine with that.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I'd like him to be a 25-15 guy in addition to the defense. That would be lovely. But I would almost care about him more as a guy who cannot get played off the floor in any matchup because he's that good defensively, and he's going to rebound well on a team that needs it because our other rebounders are... Charge is back, so that helps, but we're not a very good rebounding team. We need him to be that anchor on both defense and the boards.
Yeah, and I feel like he's coming along in chunks as far as his development goes because it was all focused on defense to start because it was so ripped on, so questioned, maligned to start. Now he's showing up that defense. I think he's getting his aggression better now. I've seen way more dunks out of him lately, him going harder at the basket lately, which is nice to see. So maybe in another year of just work, it's going to come around where he can actually start to assert himself a little bit more on offense. But he doesn't need to right now. With Chris Paul on there, with Booker on there, I don't think he needs to. And I'm kind of okay with the roster construction as it is right now, knowing that he has that potential ability within him if needed.
And the thing I think that gets forgotten, by myself even, because I had to look this up a few days ago, he didn't even play center in college.
Yep.
And the expectation was that he could be a center at the NBA level, where anybody, regardless of position, usually struggles to get a grasp on NBA level defense the first season or two, right? He didn't even play it in college. You know this better than I do because you follow college and you obviously watched him more because of ASU, blah, blah, blah. He was a power forward in college. And then shifted over to center in a grown man's league. And what happened his rookie season? Like, Nikola Jokic ate his fucking lunch. But guess what? He does that to a lot of players in the league. And he's a physical specimen and some kind of, like, gifted savant freak, right? The fact that he's gone this quickly to being this good defensively, even back to last season, obviously. So you really think of it as, what, 40 NBA games? Between, like, I mean, I guess the full rookie season. But whatever. You know, a season and change, especially with the suspension, and he's this good, does not get enough credit for that.
No, not at all. And I'm glad that I feel like the ones who know, the NBA writers and media who know, are not calling him a bust or even a potential bust anymore, which was such a stupid take by so many people calling him a bust. Not living up to expectations. Luka was way better. Okay, fine. But calling him a bust was just short-sighted and stupid. I'm glad that narrative has gone away. It's like, okay, he's going to be a solid NBA center for a long time.
Maybe he's not Luka. We've talked that subject to death on here.
Yeah.
But at the very least, you can't be like, that was the wrong pick.
Yeah, exactly. I think I try to imagine actually what this team would be like with Luka on it, and I don't know how to imagine it. Obviously, it would be completely different, but I like the way we are right now. That's for sure, and I like how Ayton's playing right now, and I don't think I'd trade it right now if I could.
I don't know that I would either, because who would you trade him for? I mean, you look at these like pie-in-the-sky scenarios, like would Joel Embiid on this team instead of Ayton be an improvement? Probably, because Embiid's a borderline MVP candidate, right? But like as far as contract and timing and injuries and everything else, because like Embiid needs 20 touches and 20 shots, more touches a game. Would you find a way to make that work with, say, Paul and Booker, whatever the fuck the roster looked like? Probably, yeah. Like they're all really good and they would all figure it out. But if you had to pick somebody to be a good running mate for Booker, wouldn't it be somebody who covers Booker's deficiencies? So why is that not like the perfect fit?
I think it is, and I think it's a huge factor of why we're winning and why I wanted to make sure we talked about him because I think he is easy with the casual fan to get lost in the shuffle of why we're winning, and I think he's a huge part of it. Like you said, our rebounding especially.
Yeah. Him and Bridges both. I think they both deserve the credit. So it's good to bring up Ayton because he got his share of malign, including us last time, where we're like, boy, he has not been good. Because defensively, he wasn't great in that stretch either, and he was putting up like 4 and 9 a night. And you're like, okay, my dude, like you, I know you're better than this. No matter what your finished product looks like, I know you're better than this. I've seen it the last 2 seasons. So we got to figure that out, right? But because Ayton and Bridges are both so good defensively and do not need touches to get their points on the offensive side, that's perfect when you're going to have Booker shooting 22 times a night and Paul taking 15 or so. That's perfect. So we'll talk about this more as the season goes on, and especially if we get closer to what is hopefully a for sure playoff berth. I don't know how high the ceiling is, but I don't care right now. I don't want to worry about the playoffs right now. I want to enjoy this regular season, especially while they're playing this brand of basketball.
And while it's fun to watch and we're beating good teams, we've had stretches in the past where we beat good teams, but this, again, I think we said this 2 years ago, last year. This feels different, and this feels different in a very good way.
I will tell you right now as we wrap up, I'm going to turn into full-fledged Shaun when the playoffs happen.
Oh yeah,
which is to say everything is going to be way too ride or die, and I'm going to be like frustrated when we lose because it's been so long. And even if after the season's over, even if we took a first-round exit, say, I will look back on that and I'll be like, yeah, that was actually a good season. I'm proud of what we did, and I hope we keep building. In the moment, I'm going to be an inconsolable mess.
I recall the last time we were in the playoffs 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, we lost game 1 to the Trailblazers, of all teams. And I actually went to that game, and I felt devastated because I remember coming into that playoffs thinking like, all right, Nash and Amari, we're back. We are going to win the title this year. This is our year. We are on fire. And we lost game 1, and I was a wreck. We rolled off. We won 8 of our next 9 games in the playoffs, and swept the Spurs and beat the Blazers in 6. So I know what you mean. I'm gonna overreact if we make the playoffs, but I need to try to hold myself back.
Yeah, but at least I'll feel something because the better part of 10 years I've been basically dead inside. So I would take rage over apathy, and then hopefully it actually goes to some kind of jubilation. And winning a playoff series would be huge. And that seems weird because just making the playoffs is already a step for this team in the last decade that we've talked to death. But I took it for granted then. Even in that season when we made the Western Conference Finals, we had that 1 year of bad in between. And we knew the clock was ticking with Nash, but it was like, we've been a contender for basically the last 7 years. So we'll have to retool some stuff, but we'll be back. And it turns out we weren't. So that even that Ron Artest putback, it sucked. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and be like, I loved it. But it didn't hit me that hard. Even in the moment, it was a gut. It made my stomach drop when it happened. But it's like, all right, that was garbage, but it's a fluke. We're not out of the series yet. And even then, we're playing with house money. We weren't supposed to be here. So, that sucked. But it's okay. We're going to come back from this. And then we have not in a decade. This year, just because I don't take it for granted, it's almost going to be worse. You'd think maybe it'd be easier because it's I'm just happy to be here. It will not be. I can tell you right now, every single possession is going to be ride or die, and I'm going to be just a disaster.
I'm going to need my family to understand that during those games, I am out of commission and don't talk to Daddy because I might hurt someone, unintentionally, but I'm going to be invested.
Daddy's just going to do this with his arms, and if you happen to run into them, that's your own fault.
Yep. Or you, Shaun, and I will just drive to meet each other somewhere and watch every single game together because we might have to do that anyway. Might happen.
I've been thinking about that. Maybe you'll be vaccinated by then.
Yeah.
My first one is scheduled. I'll just tell the viewers because it's been kind of an ongoing thing with Shaun. He just got shot too. My first one's this week. Dave's in the last group, the next to last group, unfortunately. So we'll see. But either way, I'm sure we can figure something out. But yeah, we're going to have to because, do we know what the date the playoff start is?
Late April, early May, sometime like that.
It's a smidge later, right?
I think it does. I think it does kind of contend on how the second half of the season comes together.
No, I think I already looked this up. I think it's actually end of May. Let me look real quick. I know we're almost out of time, but because I feel like the first round of the playoffs was going to start when we're in Phoenix, which was the 22nd or 23rd.
Ah, okay.
And that
Yeah,
may be
May
subject to
22nd.
change too. I know they talked about like moving the start of the All-Star or the end of the All-Star break up to get teams going again sooner, knowing that they were going to have some rescheduling.
Yeah,
But in any case, when it happens,
May 22nd
I think that's the
is the
day we
first game.
get there. I think I remember us talking about that.
Yep.
This is all like the listeners like, what the fuck? I don't. Yeah, that's the day we get there. Well, actually, I think we get there Friday night technically. The
Great.
night before. So assuming the Suns are in it, we're gonna have a way to do that the whole time. Maybe the whole like first round series. We're there till Memorial Day.
All right then, let's do this.
Yeah, so we will be doing this. We will be losing our minds. It may not be in a Buffalo Wild Wings like in the days of yore because that may not be a thing that anybody wants to do still. Even if we all are vaccinated, I'm not sure how keen I am to go back to B-dubs and just hang out with people.
Buffalo Wild Wings is dead to me. I'd maybe go to a restaurant with people if we're all vaccinated. I'm not going to B-dubs because fuck that place.
Yes, true. We can do so much better now. We had a taste on like a decade ago when we were all mid-20s and garbage humans.
Yep.
So anyways, as you can see, we're excited. And it's not just riding this wave of this last stretch and being like, wow, we're the best. It's just legitimately enjoying the arc that this season has taken and hopefully will continue to take at a level even close to this. And then from there, we'll talk about the playoffs when the time comes, if it happens. No jinxing. But boy, it feels nice.
Yep.
I've said it 3 times and I still can't come to terms with it. It's just nice.
It's pleasant. I've got goosebumps thinking about the idea of the Suns actually being in the playoffs, and hopefully like more fans will be able to come in by that time, and we'll actually have like, I don't know, excitement around Phoenix about the Suns for the first time in a decade. I'm just excited for it.
Me too. I know Shaun's been listening to us the whole time, so I think he would agree, but I don't. Yeah. Shaun, do you agree? Yeah, he said yeah.
He said yeah. Well, next week we're going a whole different direction. We're not talking about the Suns, so we got stay tuned for next week for something completely different.
It would have been great if I had done that bit without actually hearing him. I don't know if the viewers could pick that up or not. It was there, I think, faintly in the background. I saw the wave bar move, but it'd be great if I was just like, this door's closed, and I'm just like, is that all right, Shaun? He's like, yeah, it's all right. Good. Thanks for contributing. All right, that's the end of this episode. In between shows, you can find us on our website, objectionnetwork.com, or youtube.com/objectionnetwork for new videos 7 days a week. We will see you next week for what will almost certainly be our review of Persona 5 Royal.
I beat it.